We're just going to get started. We have a little bit of business to conduct before we hand over to Ellen to introduce Alicia and talk about this very interesting topic that touches all of our lives. Thank you so much for coming out this morning. It's really nice to see all of you. We have a couple items of business. First and foremost, we have to pass a couple of minutes. I know it sounds crazy. We're going to pass some general meeting minutes from November and January. We did not have a general meeting in December because we didn't have one in February. We had past meetings in January because we had a co-meeting with SAS, and we just moved into content. So if I could have a motion to pass general PFA meeting minutes from the November general meeting and the January general meeting at the Budnick. Kim Hall seconds. Any opposed? All in favor? Motion carries. Thank you. Yeah, we're going to update you then on another vote that we need to take.
Okay, so the second vote is a little more exciting. So just to report that we had a very successful fundraising year thanks to the generosity of all of our parent community, many of you in this room. So we are able to proceed on making an improvement in the student dining space that has been on the wish list of both the faculty and the students for some time now. So after working for the past few months, thanks to clarifying, review of multiple options, obtaining multiple quotes from multiple vendors, discussions with faculty, facilities managers, custodians, we are prepared to move forward with the first phase of adding some needed seating in the dining space, as well as improving the overall aesthetic and vibe down there for our students. So as such, we are going to begin phase one, and hopefully next year there might be a phase two if we are successful again. So at this time, we'd like to step forth a motion to include spending PFA funds that we have through successful fundraising this year, saved up to $50,000 for phase one of this United States Improvement Project. So do I have a motion to do I have a second? Heather. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed?
Oh, thank you. Thank you. So with that, Ellen, we'll hand it over to you.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Ellen Brzezowski from New Canaan Cares. Thanks for braving the coronavirus and coming out today. I think that you will be very pleased that you did come out, and Alicia Farrell is very highly recommended and an excellent speaker, and it's a very important topic. So I'm just going to introduce Alicia, and then we'll get started. So Dr. Alicia Farrell is an accomplished cognitive psychologist, former university professor, fellowship award recipient, published research scientist, national keynote speaker, and founder of Clearview Consulting. In her private practice, Dr. Farrell has counseled hundreds of clients on how to get back to basics to achieve their life goals and personal well-being. Her clients have ranged in age from 13 to 98. She has worked with individuals, couples, parents, families, and professionals. She also brings 10 years of corporate experience to her work. In addition to her private practice, Dr. Farrell is a gifted trainer and speaker who delivers dynamic keynotes, workshops on topics including, but not limited to, expert problem solving, positive parenting, effects of drugs and technology on adolescent brains, and socio-emotional development, stress and anxiety, grit and resilience, adolescent brain development, and how it influences thoughts and behaviors, and how the pressure to be perfect is influencing our children's development. As important as her formal education has been, real-life experiences have had a powerful influence over how she helps people and organizations identify and use their struggles to find their strength. She is particularly committed to teaching and empowering parents to raise self-reliant children who have grit and resilience. Dr. Farrell brings 25 plus years of experience and passion to her work. And there is a handout that was on the table, and her contact information is on there to get more information and follow her website. Okay. And we were handed an evaluation when you walked in, so please take a minute at the end to fill that out and just put it on the back table on your way out. All right? Thank you very much, Dr. Farrell. Thank you.
Hold on a second. Am I on? Can you guys hear me okay? That's always the most painful part, to have to listen to somebody read about yourself. Oh, God. So I'm always relieved when that's over and actually up in front of you guys. So welcome. Thank you so much for coming out today. We have a nice solid hour together. I like to keep my talks very interactive, so feel free to ask questions, or if you want to share an anecdote or something like that, that's fine. I just ask that you keep it relatively short so that we're sure to move through the material. I'm excited to be here today with this talk. I wrote this talk a couple of years ago in direct reaction to what I was seeing in my private practice and the way that things seem to be shifting with my younger clients. And just seeing a lot of young people, both middle school, high school, and young adults who are really struggling with anxiety and stress, and also parents who are really struggling, trying to figure out how hard to push, when to push, what the expectation should be, where the boundaries should be. So that was this talk is really an outgrowth of those experiences. So what I'm going to try to do today is, and I say try because we're tackling a really big subject. I'm going to try to begin to answer a question for you guys. And the question is, how do we raise well-adjusted, productive, self-sufficient, independent, civil adults in a very complicated world that values performance over character? Big question, right? One that I know you guys all have on your minds, that you're all struggling with. So specifically today, we're going to focus on 4 primary points of interest. One is the pressure that our children are under to be perfect, the consequences of that pursuit, and the benefits of failure, and what we can do as parents and educators and administrators and community leaders to try to mentor and support our kids as they grow into their adult years. So let me just kind of get a feel from all of you. How many of you have kids in high school? Okay. And how many of you have kids in middle school? Excellent. Anybody who came today that have children in elementary school? Yeah, both and some. Excellent, excellent. Really trying to get to the elementary school parents so that they can start to implement these concepts at really early ages. So I love the fact that you guys are here. How many people here are teachers? Any teachers? A couple teachers? Anybody who's actually in the counseling business? Any professionals here? Excellent. Okay. All right, great. Well, thank you very much for coming. All right, so I'm going to just tell you a little bit more about myself because it actually relates to the topic that we're discussing today. So I grew up under the thumb of an admiral. My dad was an admiral in the Navy, and it was a relatively hard knocks upbringing. We moved every year, 2 years, my entire childhood. And in my family, not only was there an expectation that you're going to perform, but there was an expectation that you would do it with character. So there was sort of a double whammy there. And I grew up under that kind of tutelage as a perfectionist. I am a perfectionist in recovery. Because when you're a dyed-in-the-wool perfectionist, it's something you have to work on overcoming in your life in some respects. There's some really powerful, wonderful things about being a perfectionist as well. So when I'm speaking to you today about perfectionism and the pressure our kids are under, I'm not only speaking to you from a professional point of view, but I have personal experience knowing what it's like to live in a body and a mind that has those kinds of expectations. Anybody here that already know that you are, too, a perfectionist? Some people are like, me. That might be me. I might be a perfectionist. It's not a dirty word. What's interesting is that in past generations, in my generation, I'm a baby boomer, there weren't a lot of perfectionists in the sense that there wasn't a lot of anxiety. There wasn't a lot of performance-oriented anxiety in my generation. There was a lot of benign neglect, I'll call it, all right? So we were sort of just left to figure things out for ourselves. And there's some good aspects to that, and there's some not so good aspects to that. What I'm seeing in my practice now is that a lot of kids are presenting as perfectionists. And that's unusual. That's different than it has been in the past. And that's one of the things that was perplexing to me is, why is it that these kids are coming in with these expectations of themselves, and so many of them? Whether or not it's temperamental for them or environmental, it just seems like there was a preponderance of that. So we're going to kind of pick that apart a little bit, and you'll understand from my perspective why that may be happening. But let's go ahead and start with a definition of perfectionism so that you guys understand, we're all on the same page, you understand actually what it is. So first we're going to talk about a simple definition, and then I'm going to kind of flesh it out a little bit. So a simple definition of perfectionism is that the root of perfectionism is believing that your self-worth, right, your self-worth is based on your achievements. So when you think of a perfectionist, you think of someone who tries to do everything perfectly. And there's sometimes an aspect of that, but perfectionism is really a belief system. And the belief system is that I am worthy as long as I perform. So it's performance-based. And performance-based means that it could have to do with your grades, it could have to do with the car you drive, the clothes you wear, whether or not you're pretty, whether or not you're naturally intelligent, athletic, etc., etc., etc. It's really anything that might be measured by other people. Okay? So, a belief system, the root of perfectionism. So remember that when we're talking about the pressure that our kids are under to be perfect, what we're talking about is that our children are learning a belief system that they're using to evaluate their self-worth. It's not rational, all right? Perfectionism is an irrational thing because nobody can be perfect. And what do perfectionists do? So what we do is we raise the bar really high, and then we work really hard to get to that bar. And sometimes we actually get there because oftentimes people that are dyed-in-the-wool perfectionists are quite capable individuals, and they're willing to, to kind of double down to reach their goal. What happens when a perfectionist actually reaches their bar? What do? We bump it up, right? You bump it up. Because what do we think once we reach our bar? Once we actually perform to the level of expectation that we have of ourselves, what do we experience? Yeah, exactly. First thing we say is, well, it must not have been high enough, right? So I'm just going to go ahead and bump that baby up a little bit higher. So what you do is you end up in a cycle of never feeling like you are enough. Right? Never quite get there. And you also don't enjoy the journey of reaching your accomplishments either. And the reason is because perfectionism as a belief system motivates us to perform based on fear. And what fear in particular? Fear of failure, exactly. So when you're a perfectionist, you're motivated to perform from the fear of failure. So it's a negative place of motivation. And it's what we call an external locus of control. All right, so let's talk about that for a second. This is actually a personality theory out of the 1940s. So there's an internal locus of control, and there's an external locus of control, and they survive on a continuum, so it's not black and white. You don't have one or the other, you have some of each. So when you have an external locus of control, you don't feel like you have control over your own self-worth or your own accomplishments. You feel like really they're predicated on how other people judge you. When you have an internal locus of control, you have this strong belief system that you can handle it, whatever it is, even if it's something that you've never experienced before. You believe that you can figure it out, you can solve your problems, you can make choices, and improve the quality of your life. So let me give you a simple definition or an example of those two. So if you have, and this is going to sound familiar to you because your kids are going to express external locus of control as they mature. So don't be afraid when I give you this example. You're like, oh my God, my child's got an external locus of control. It's okay. So you have a child who gets a poor grade on their exam. And they come home, and all they do is they complain and they push against everything outside of them. Well, you know, I told you I wanted oatmeal for breakfast that morning, and you made me pancakes, and that was too many carbs, and my blood sugar dropped, and that's why I didn't do well on my chemistry exam. Or the teacher has such unrealistic expectations, and I did the entire review sheet, and I went to the review class, and then there was nothing on the exam that was on the review sheet. So how was I supposed to perform, right? That is a very simple example of an external locus of control. When you have an internal locus of control and something, you hit adversity of some type, your natural inclination, sometimes after you pass through the external locus of control, because sometimes we have to express that, get over the emotion of the situation. And then what we do is we tend to say to ourselves, I wonder what I could do differently next time in order to do better in that situation. And then you start to problem solve and you say, oh, I can do this, I can do this, I can do that. All right, I'll check that out next time. Right? So ultimately what we want is we want our children to have a nice, strong, internal locus of control that they can process through their external when they're emotional, and they get to that place where they feel like they can handle it. All right. Okay. So, let's now make this slightly more complicated to represent the modern day and what is changing with our children, or what has changed with our children. There's actually 3 types of perfectionism, and some people have all 3. They're the trifecta, they get all 3 of them. It's a wonderful thing. So one type of perfectionism is thinking that you have to be perfect. Another is thinking that other people must be perfect in order for me to be okay. Everybody else has to be perfect. And then the third kind is when you think that other people think that you are supposed to be perfect. So here's what's really interesting about this. Between the years 1989 and 2012, we saw over a 30% increase in one of these types of perfectionism in our children. And which one do you think it is? Number 3. So we saw a 30% increase in our kids believing that we expect them to be perfect. Thus the belief system. Okay? Thus the belief system that is infiltrated. And this starts at very, very young ages in this day and age. Because performance measurements and performance expectations on our children begin very, very early. So now preschool is not enough. There's actually preschool. And I don't know how old these kids are. I mean, they're still meat puppets. They're still kind of, like, whoa, whoa. But somehow now we've got them in preschool to prepare them for the journey of childhood, so that when they get out of high school, they won't end up homeless. Somehow we have this misconception that our children are not going to make it. Somehow they're not going to make it. And we have to make sure as parents and as teachers and administrators and all in the community that we really guide our children in a way that allows them to have everything they need, all the skills and everything, all the accolades they need to get out and be successful. This is, and we don't have time to go into all the history of where this came through our culture, but I will say that it started back in the 1980s with the disappearance of Adam. Remember John Walsh? Yeah, and his son was abducted and murdered, and they made a movie out of it. And millions of early young baby boomers saw that movie. And there was this switch that went off in this country that our children are not safe. And we have to supervise them. And we have to, always have our eyes on them. Otherwise, someone's going to snatch them, and that'll be it, right? So then what we piled on top of that was some really bad psychological theories that suggested that we have to work on our children's self-esteem. So we started to get these messages as parents that we needed to tell our kids how great they are. We have to build their self-esteem. And we'll go into that in a second a little bit more. So we got into this whole frame of mind of praising and recognizing. Because if we don't do that, then our kids won't know how great they are. When in reality, a child earns their self-esteem. You can't give it to them, right? So then the next thing that happened, the third thing that came together to contribute to this, was a report out of our federal government that our children were falling behind academically and we were not competitive with other countries. And so the educational environment doubled down, and what this has all resulted to is what we see now, which is a lot of overparenting, a lot of expectations on our kids that are developmentally inappropriate. And I'll give you a perfect example, and I'll tell you who's struggling. I would say more so than the girls, the boys are really struggling. And one of the reasons is because we're expecting things of them at very, very early ages that they're not developmentally ready to do. So if you take a boy, and I know I'm generalizing for clarity, and there's a lot of sensitivity around gender and sex and all this kind of stuff, but stay with me on this. So you take a young man, a little boy, and you stick him in a preschool environment, and you require him to sit quietly and do fine motor skills, you're going to have a child that struggles. Right? So several weeks ago, my husband was in New York City on business, and hopefully his boss doesn't end up watching this. Oh God, maybe he lives around here. Anyway, his boss they were in a meeting, and his boss left the meeting and said he had to take a phone call, and he came back and he was all frazzled. And my husband said, "What's going on? Is everything okay?" And he said, "Yeah, I was just on a conference call with my son's preschool teachers, and they were just they were telling me that he wasn't keeping up on his work." So that child is, this boss lives in New York City, and that child is on a very fast march to take the entrance exams to get into some private elementary schools, middle schools, and high schools. So this is serious business. And this young man is 4 years old. Okay? So we deliver this message that our children's performance is directly tied to their self-worth, starting at very, very young ages, right, in our culture right now. Okay, so let's take a look at just some different forms of behavior that tend to be representative of individuals who have this belief system. They tend to be very critical of themselves, and oftentimes critical of other people as well, because it's hard not to have that expectation of others when you have it of yourself. The expectations tend to be unrealistic. There is often excessive concerns about mistakes and errors, and you may see this with your kids. You may see kind of a hypersensitivity around any kind of correction, any kind of, if they fail, if they make a mistake, if they don't do well, they'll overreact to that. Right? Lots of self-doubt, projecting an image of flawlessness. So sometimes individuals, and we see this with our children as well, and we'll talk about social media, because I know social media is, let me just say it now since we're talking about it. And I know I'm preaching to the choir here, but social media has created this completely false world with which our children identify themselves through. So my generation, when we went through that period of identification, a really intense period when you're in your teens, we did it like this. So you could see that your peers were just as knuckleheaded as you were, right? And they had, their skin problems, and awkward and they would say silly things or they would try something that wouldn't work and it would be embarrassing. So we had a frame of reference where, oh, okay, I'm kind of part of a group of people that are going through something similar. What's happening now with social media is that these kids are actually trying to identify themselves with a frame of reference that reflects perfection. Well, who can live up to that, right? So everybody looks great, and trust me, no one is that good looking, okay? And nobody is having that much fun. No family gets along that great. I'm sorry, but they just don't. I was talking to a community last year in Wilton. I was doing this talk, and I made mention of that, and somebody raised their hand, and they said, oh my gosh, we were on vacation, and we took this family photo, and everybody was, like, hi, everybody's having a great time. And she said 2 seconds after that photo, 2 of my kids were in timeout the rest of the day. So think about this. Yeah.
And I was just going to say, what you're hearing too with the college students is that they're seeing their friends having so much fun and they're happy, and they're having it sometimes staying at school, and it's
Yeah.
that's a very generalization. But I think it's really impacting these kids that are going off to school, seeing their friends, one to Texas and one to North Carolina, and they're having more fun. Maybe I'm not having as much fun. It's starting to question the college experiences, and I've seen that. We haven't seen that.
Yeah. So let me just repeat that for those of you who may not have heard what she said, which is a really great point with the college kids these days. So they're experiencing that frame of reference as well, and it's actually jeopardizing their experience at college because they see their friends in other colleges around the country, and they appear to be having so much more fun than they're having. And oftentimes, we were talking about this last night at a forum in Old Saybrook. The statistics in this country are that 30% of the college kids, the kids that go to college, end up coming home after the first year. 30%. 40% end up coming home by their junior year. Think about that. And so much of why this is happening is because these children don't have the grit and the resilience that they need to be out there, tolerating discomfort, and knowing that they're supposed to be uncomfortable. They're supposed to be uncomfortable. We want our children to learn that at very early ages. I say torture your children in a very nice and safe way, but make sure that you're creating adversity in their lives in ways that are age-appropriate, developmentally appropriate, so that they start to realize how incredibly capable and strong they actually are. Because that's what they're going to need. Yes. Yes. They're coming home. And I'll tell you what's really interesting about that, and I don't have statistics for this, this is more from my observation. Many of those kids, those 30%, 40% kids, were some of the highest performer kids in high school. Some of the highest performing kids in high school are the ones that are ending up dropping out and struggling. And there are many reasons for that, but one of the reasons is that first of all, they're burned out. They get to college and the bar goes up, and they're like, oh my God, are you kidding me? I don't know that I can do this. And they don't have this deeper sense of themselves. And, as you pointed out, the influence of social media, to ground themselves in discomfort and reality, and know that fixed ability. Okay, so this is a concept that is really important for us to communicate to our children. Fixed ability does not exist. All right, now let me tell you what that means. What it means is that you can get better at anything, but you don't have to be good at everything. And if you have that mindset, then you can better enjoy the effort that you put into what you want to do. So I'll give you an example of that. When my son was in high school, he had to take French. And he took French from elementary school on, and he was just does not have whatever that thing is in your brain that allows you to learn languages. So it was always a real struggle for him. And, you know, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree, so he had relatively high expectations of himself, and he couldn't meet them. And one night we're sitting at the dining room table, and he's studying for a French exam, and he's just flopping all over the place, you know. He's like, oh, I hate the teacher, I hate this, I hate that. I kept saying, you know, dude, what is really the problem? Ah, it's this, it's that. I said, no, what really is the problem? And finally he barks out, I can't stand French. I said, well, yeah, okay. So let's talk about that. So you don't like French. You don't really want to work too hard at French, but you know you have to do well enough. What would be okay with you? To make a decision. You don't have to be good at French. I said, I don't care if you learn to speak French. You can't fail the class, but I don't care if you learn to speak French. You love history, you love English, you like these other things, you put effort into those, great, right? We discriminate our efforts. We don't have to be perfect at everything. We don't have to be good at everything. And the minute he came to that realization, he said, well, I mean, in this case, I'd probably be okay with a C. I said, great, go for a C. So he was done studying like 3 minutes later. And he said, folded up his books, and that was it. And that was fine. We watched a movie or whatever we did. And what do you think happened? He did better. Right. He did better. He not only did better on that exam, he ended up doing just fine in the class. Why? Okay, so the reason why, and this is where everyone shudders, okay? The reason why is he lowered his expectations. And when I say that, I'm telling you, I've done this talk to hundreds and hundreds of people. I hear this gasp in the audience, like, lower expectations? Oh, no, that's not okay, Alicia, we're not lowering expectations. Well, all the research suggests that if you want to improve performance, lower your expectations. You don't have to change your goal, but if you lower your expectations, you take a lot of the anxiety out.
Dear faculty, this is Sri. Sorry for the interruption. The union leadership would like to meet with you at some point during the lunch waves today. They'll be in there in the writing room during one of the 3 lunch waves. Again, this is for the teachers. Union leadership would like to meet with you during the lunch waves today. They'll be there for all 3 lunch waves, so please stop by and meet with them from 11 to 12:30. So thank you very much, and I hope you guys have a good day.
I totally lost my concentration, so I'm gonna let this person ask me a question and get me back on track.
Now, my husband would shudder at the thought of lowering expectations. What I think that would totally drop my daughter's mind. Are there any folks saying that and address that topic?
Let's see. I probably have a couple, and I'm not going to remember. Yeah, just get back to me. Just shoot me an email, and I'll give you some suggestions. Yeah. I'm sorry. So the question was that her husband is aghast at lowering expectations. So she's obviously trying to become the expert in why he should, and so she's asking if there are some books. And there are some books that would be helpful to you. So if you have the same question, feel free to shoot me an email, and I'll let you know what those are. Yeah, there's a couple really good ones actually. Now that I'm thinking through it. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so the point is that perhaps what we're talking about is our children's ability to compromise this belief system that they need to be perfect. Somehow they have to find a way to compromise it for themselves so that they take some of the pressure off and they become more realistic around their pursuits. Absolutely, however you want to come at it, if you want to call it compromising, great. point is that here's what keeps the kids from compromising, and this is what we need to know as parents, is that they believe that their worthiness is tied to their performance. And when you feel like your worthiness, whether you're worthy of love and affection and respect is directly tied to your performance, it's very difficult to compromise the belief system itself. So you can see how that would create the perfect storm for anxiety. And what do we see in our kids these days? This massive increase in anxiety. And what I will suggest to you is that some of that we're calling anxiety, but it's actually stress. And it's very important to distinguish between stress and anxiety with our children, because they're getting the message that feeling uncomfortable is not okay, and it's not normal. And other people don't experience it the way that I experience it. So real quick, and I won't talk on this, but I just want to plant the seed with you. Stress is a reasonable, rational reaction to a situation that's challenging or to adversity. Right? It's normal. So if you have a chemistry exam and you're feeling a little agitated, maybe a little in your stomach, and maybe you're just a little jacked up, that's stress. That is normal. You don't go to the nurse for that. That's like you have an exam, and you're going to feel that way. And there's a really important reason you feel that way. And the reason is because your brain gets this nice burst of dopamine, which helps you concentrate and focus and actually raises your performance. It becomes anxiety when it's irrational. So if you have a chemistry exam and you're having a panic attack, like some lion is chasing you down the hallway, that is anxiety, right? Very different, those two things. So we want to normalize stress, and we want to treat anxiety. Okay? So normalize stress with your kids and treat anxiety. Very, very important to make that distinction.
How do you separate those? How do you figure out which is which?
So the question is, how do you separate those out? How do you figure out which is which? And the way you figure it out is over time. So in order for a clinician to diagnose an anxiety disorder in a child, they need to have been experiencing heightened levels of stress and what we would call classic anxiety. So much stress that it shuts their prefrontal cortex down and they can't process, they can't think. It's actually influencing the quality of their life and their ability to perform. We need to see that over the course of 4 to 6 months. Right? So stress is going to come and go. That's a natural part of life. And heightened levels of stress are also going to come and go. And heightened levels of stress, you want to think about stress and anxiety on a continuum. So heightened levels of stress are going to often present in similar ways to anxiety. All right? So we want to see, does it pass? Does a child work their way through it and they get on with their business and they seem to be fine and it's not affecting the quality of their learning or the quality of their relationships and their connections, their behavior at home where they might be acting out or very reactive for a long period of time. If you see a pattern and that pattern persists month after month, day after day, then you want to take a close look at it. Yeah. So it takes time. It takes time to sort that out. If you have a child who seems to be going through a circumstantial anxiety or stress, and you take them to a clinician, and that clinician diagnoses them with an anxiety disorder after a couple of sessions and puts them on medication, go to somebody else. Children should, in my view, medication is a beautiful thing. It saves lives. And there are absolutely children who need to be on medication to take the edge off, to do the work they need to do in order to get the tools to manage their anxiety. But medication is not the end-all and the be-all. So before your child is put on medication, they should be working with a clinician who does cognitive behavioral therapy and dialectic behavioral therapy to see if you can get the skills in place for them to learn to tolerate the discomfort, because this is what happens with anxiety. It kind of comes up like this, it peaks, and it's right about here you feel like you can't take it anymore. It's kind of like contractions, ladies, where you get to that point where I can't do it, and then you wait a minute and it starts to subside again. So the CBT and the DBT teaches the kids and teaches us as adults how to ride that wave, right? So you've got to do that work. And if your child is on medication, they must be doing that work in addition to the medication that they're taking. Because the medication does not solve the problem. It doesn't arm them. It doesn't give them the skills and the tools that they need. Yeah. Yeah. So the question is, if you have a child who has had some sensory issues and some anxiety in the past, and now they seem to be developing a tic disorder, or they're pulling their hair out, or something along those lines, is that indicative of anxiety? Is that what you're asking? Yeah, and I would say absolutely. That would be, those are very clear signs that that child is struggling with anxiety. Yeah. With boys, what's really interesting with boys and anxiety is oftentimes anxiety will come out in boys as aggression. And it's misdiagnosed. And these boys are seen as being aggressive, having anger problems, and they're disciplined, they're separated, they may be diagnosed with ADHD, which may be it may be part of the problem as well. So what I often see, and it breaks my heart, is these young men that come in and have been misdiagnosed very early on in their childhood, and they've stuffed all their emotions and their anxiety, and they will just start to cry when you actually say, you know what, I think what you're dealing with is anxiety. I'm like, oh my God, I think that's it. I've been anxious since I was, 5 years old, or something along those lines. Yeah, so girls, in terms of anxiety, girls actually respond differently. Girls are much more verbal, first of all, so oftentimes they'll talk to you about it. But they actually have a tendency to hold, when they're experiencing anxiety at moderate levels, they will actually hold it in. And then what you'll see with girls is you'll see things like cutting. So when it gets to be really significant for them, they'll cut to relieve themselves, they'll have eating disorders, they'll do, self-harm, that kind of stuff. So boys and girls tend to deal with stress a little bit differently. And one of the reasons is it's actually neurological. There's a chemical called oxytocin, and oxytocin is released when you get stressed. And in girls, what happens is we get a really big flood of oxytocin when we get stressed. And what's beneficial for that is that oxytocin actually, it's called the connection hormone. It actually propels you to connect with other people. So, and this is not just kids that experience this, boys and girls, but men and women, we're different. So our tendency as girls is to reach out. We're going to reach out. We're going to try to connect. And boys, on the other hand, get less oxytocin. Their tendency is to isolate and figure things out for themselves. And then you'll see that come out sideways as anger and aggression. So a few things that I want to talk about that we've touched on, and we'll blow through these really quickly. And these are things that I feel are contributing to our kids' belief system, our perfectionistic belief system. There is a biological component. Temperament is biological. So there is a temperamental component to some people's tendency to be driven, all right, to be driven to be perfect or to do really, really quite well. And it's, the genetic component is linked to things like OCD. Individuals who have OCD often have a temperamental predisposition towards needing things to be just perfect, right? It makes sense. And another is eating disorders. Eating disorders is another external representation of perhaps a biological component. One of the things that I'm seeing with our kids, and to refer back to something we talked about in the beginning of the talk, and that is that there seems to be such a larger preponderance of kids that seem to have this belief system. So I'm getting a lot of kids that present as being obsessive. And it isn't, they don't necessarily have the compulsive behaviors. So they're not tapping, they're not counting, they're not, moving things around and things have to be perfect. It's all in their head. It's this obsessive thought process that also comes along with OCD. But oftentimes with OCD, what we see is the compulsive behaviors. There's a lot of kids that just cannot stop their brains. They just can't, they get caught in these loops and they can't get out. And we call that pure O, pure obsession, pure O. And I think that that is a representation of this perfectionistic belief system that they have learned and are now trying to figure out how to function in the face of. And so they spend a lot of time upstairs trying to make things right, trying to figure out how could I have fixed, down to the point where kids are actually conscious of how they're holding their physical bodies, even when they're by themselves. So I have teenagers who are saying to me, oh yeah, I'll be studying in my room, but I'll think, oh, I should move my arm over here and just set it like this. Or I should cross my legs instead of have them uncrossed. And nobody is even there. But they're processing everything about themselves in the moment, trying to perfect everything that's going on. So pure O, something to really keep in mind. Unrealistic expectations we talked about that are developmentally inappropriate. Excessive praise and recognition. So it's okay to praise your children. It's totally fine. Everything, pretty much everything, with the exception of violence, obviously, is okay in moderation with our kids. So praising in moderation is okay. But we have taken praise to this level of ridiculousness. And I was always proud to say that I never went to an awards ceremony with my son because he never got an award. and you're like, oh, Jesus, I'm sorry for him. He's actually 26 and doing fabulously. So you go to these award ceremonies, and I'm sure you guys have been to them, and poor Johnny gets an award for never missing a day of school, and Johnny's like dragging ass up to the, he's got blood, and he's, even when I had the coronavirus, I went to school, I had pneumonia, and instead of going to the emergency room, I went to my chemistry exam, and poor Johnny, he can't even be sick. So let me give you an example of how praise feels. And then I'm going to give you an example of how it feels to be thoughtfully reflected upon in a worthiness sort of way. Okay? So, you got a child, you're making dinner, and you say, hey, could you set the table for me? And your child sets the table for you. And you're like, oh, man, you are such a good table setter. And you're such a good boy, and this and that, it's all this very dichotomous good and bad. So oftentimes when we praise our children, what they hear is, if you say, oh, you're such a good boy for doing that for me, what they hear is, ooh, that means I could be a bad boy. They hear the flip side of that, which creates stress, which, if it's done on a frequent basis, can create anxiety. So I have a client who's brilliant. He's 23, he's going to Northeastern, he's getting his degree in physics or something. I don't know what he's doing. It's nuts. I can't understand what he says. So anyway, he was talking about how very early on he was identified, obviously, as being very, very bright. And he was told very early on how smart he was. You're so smart. You're such a smart boy. Oh my gosh, look at that. You can do that now. You're so smart. You're so intelligent. And he said what that ultimately ended up doing was putting so much pressure on him to perform. Because he heard that in order to be good enough, I have to be smart. So guess what he did? He backed off. Oftentimes under that kind of pressure, what boys will do is they'll actually, like, I don't even care. I'm not even going to try. Because the pressure is too much. So we have to be careful about how and when we praise our children. So let me give you an alternative. And this is a lot of work not to praise them, but instead to give them meaningful reflection. So you have a child, they set the table, and you say to that child, oh, you know what, honey, I had such a brutal day at work today. I am so tired, and the fact that you set that table for me, that has made my whole day. Because now I actually feel like I can make a salad. Because up until then, I wasn't sure I was going to get through dinner. What do you think that feels like? What would it feel like to you? All of a sudden, you'll see your child, and their shoulders will go up, and their shoulders will go back, and they'll be like, oh my gosh, I'm a powerful person. I can influence how my parent is actually experiencing life in the moment, and I can improve that. I can do something that makes a difference. I'm of value. Not the fact that I set the table is of value, it's that I can do things that are of value to other people. And if you personalize that message, that individual is going to make the connection. You know the difference between somebody coming up and saying, oh, hey, you know what, I really appreciate you did this. That's easy to say. Anybody can say that to anybody, right? But if they come up and they actually say something personal to you, like, you know what, I know you're going through a really difficult time right now, and you took the time out of your life to help me with that project. I just want to tell you how meaningful that is to me. Oh, man, that fills you up. So, take that under consideration. Take time to, yeah. Okay, so another example she's asking, and all right, so you're going to challenge me here on the spot. Now that's all right. Let's see how good I am. All right, so let's say that, okay, perfect. Let's say that you have a child who is very athletic. Right? And they're on a team and they do very well. And you go to one of the games and they score the winning score. Let's say it's a lacrosse game and it's your son and they score the winning score. And afterwards you say to them, praise, okay? You say to them, wow, you are such an awesome scorer. Like, I mean, you score like nobody's business, man. That is amazing. How you made that score, right? And that's praise. Thoughtful reflection would be something like, you know what I noticed when I was watching the game? I noticed how incredibly focused you are at, in being a team player and being part of the team. And the fact that you scored that last score must feel amazing to you to be able to celebrate with everybody and to contribute like that. There's all kinds of messages in there, right? It's not all about you, which our kids are getting this message and they don't want it to be all about them, by the way. So it's not all about you, and you are of value to a group of people, and you did something that was really great that actually influenced a group of people. And isn't that what life is all about? That's at the heart of connection. That's at the heart of coming together and having a common goal and actually accomplishing it, instead of just trying to be the best. Our kids think they are supposed to be the best. And if they're not the best, then they're not going to make it. Because we're raising them in an incredibly competitive world. And we feel the same way. We feel like if we don't raise our children to be competitive and to drive really hard and to be the best, that somehow they're going to end up unemployed, homeless, I don't know, toothless, living somewhere. I don't know what we think is going to happen. But we think that our kids aren't going to make it. And I'm here to tell you that there's a place in this world for everybody. And your children, if you raise your children with character, will find their place, not your place. Because I'll tell you what, raising children is not about you. And it's hard to hear, but it's true. It's not about us. It's not about our children making us look like we did a good job parenting, or making us look like we're really intelligent or really successful. And we have, perfectly honest with you guys, and I say we because it's all of us, we all have a problem in this day and age getting our egos involved in our parenting. And it puts a lot of pressure on our children to be perfect. Because they pick up on that. They pick up on the fact that you respond better when they do really, really well, and you can talk about it to your peers and to your family members, than when they don't, and you feel shame. When you feel shame around your children's behavior and their performance, they feel shame about themselves. And shame is an extremely destructive emotion. It's not a motivating emotion.
What about if you had a parent who was anxious and instead of that coming out as really trying to talk about your child, and so it's like, okay, what these things that I didn't accomplish with grandma, we're now going to go to something.
Okay, so this is a really great question, and there's actually a word for it. So the question is, well, what if you are a perfectionist and you pass that on to your child through working on things that you experienced growing up and being that way? It's actually called intergenerational transfer, and we all do it, okay? So if you think you haven't done it, if you think you haven't passed your stuff on to your kids, then I want you to come and I want to study you, because I'm not exactly sure how you did that, but we need to know. It's called intergenerational transfer. So that's why we want to handle and get help around our stuff, so that we can minimize that. Your kids are going to have their own stuff anyway, because we're all human. So if you have issues with anxiety, get help so that you don't transfer it to your kids. So I'll give you an example of intergenerational transfer in terms of anxiety. Let's say you have anxiety yourself, and you have a child who's going to their first sleepover. Well, you're going to be really anxious about that. And here's what you do. A week ahead of time, you start talking to your child. Your child is not exhibiting any kind of anxiety around the sleepover, but you are feeling like, well, what if this, what if that? And so you say to your child, a week ahead of time, it's like, okay, look, there's no reason to worry about this sleepover, okay? And this is how it's going to go. We're going to pack your bag. In fact, we could do that this weekend, even though it's a week away, just so it's all done. So we're going to pack your bag, and we're going to have it by the door, and I'm going to take you. I'm taking you to the sleepover. I would never have you walk. So we're going to drive there, and trust me, I would never, ever have you just get out of the car and go in. So I'll park the car. I'm going to go in with you. And when you're ready for me to leave, you just give me the thumbs up, but I will not leave until you are comfortable. Right. Now, if I leave and you realize that you don't want to be there or you're uncomfortable in any way, you just call me and I will come get you. And the child's like, holy cow, this is way over my head. These sleepovers are obviously incredibly dangerous. And perhaps I shouldn't go at all. Okay? That's intergenerational transfer. All right?
I'm sorry, just
That's wonderful. Thank you for admitting that. We have a parent admitting they just did that. That's great. Yeah.
So I know that in working tolerance, how can I cope with this spouse that really doesn't want to let my daughter cope with this?
So the question is, how do you deal with a spouse who doesn't want who can't tolerate your child's discomfort? And, that's worthy of a session. It's a hard thing because really,
And that's the tricky part. Like, I have a son with autism, and they told us very early on that to actually every day let at least one thing go wrong so that he could learn how to cope when things go wrong. And I feel like our society doesn't give kids the space to let something go wrong. That actually you're not a good parent if you let that go wrong for your child. It's just hard.
so this woman is telling the story about her child and had gotten advice early on to allow the child to experience discomfort once a day at least. And the husband has a difficult time with that. Yeah, it would be helpful. So in a case like that, just a few things that you want to think about if you're faced with a situation like that. Understand what your significant other's temperament is. So it sounds like your husband may have perfectionistic sort of tendencies. He may also have some anxiety himself. And so this is a perfect example, once again, of intergenerational transfer, where it's really the parents' stuff, right? The child is going to accommodate and adjust to whatever environment you create for them. And if it's normal and accepted and required of them to tolerate discomfort, they will learn to tolerate discomfort. If it isn't, they won't. Okay? So my guess is that, there's some work that perhaps he could do that would not only improve his parenting, but would also improve his own life. Because he has a belief system that creates suffering unnecessarily. So a perfectionistic belief system creates suffering unnecessarily because it's irrational. You're never going to get there. But you're going to be anxious about it. And you're going to transfer it to other people, that anxiety. Oh, it can't be like that. It's got to be like this. We've got to know. We got to know how that's going to work out. Well, do we? And yeah, we do. Because if I don't know, I'm not okay. And that's what your husband is. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Good. Okay. How much time do I have left? 5 minutes? Wow. Okay. All right, just real quick, a few other things, and then I'm going to spend the last 5 minutes actually just reviewing the handout with you so this is, here's the struggle I had. I wrote this, and I got to the end, I'm like, well, this is all fine and dandy, but what the hell do we do about it, right? So I'm going to give you, that's why I came up with a handout, which is some very core messages that I think we need to work on communicating to our children and mentoring and modeling for our kids. So just a few other things that are happening in our world that seem to be contributing to this perfectionist belief system. Are kids being measured and compared? We know that happens now, right? Raising our children in a very adult world, under adult supervision. Just about anything and everything they do is organized and supervised by an adult. Our children are not being allowed to be free, and we need to have some of that. Reasonably, okay? Learning that things are black and white, so there's a lot of dichotomous thinking, a lot of black and white. It's good, it's bad, she's pretty, she's ugly, she's smart, she's dumb, as if there aren't any shades of gray. So you want to start to teach your children that shades of gray are really where most of us are. Now this is going to shock all of you, but the truth is that the great majority of us are average. I know, some of you are like, hell no. But the truth is that most of us are average. So if you take a look at a bell curve, we're all right about there in the middle. I mean, we've got a few that are really lucky out here, and they're They're highly intelligent. We got a few over here, but most of us are right in here. Now, here's what you also don't know, is that you can be average and exceptional at the same time. I'm working on a talk, and the name of it is Bring Back Average. What happened to average? Right? And again, everyone's like, oh, average. But you can, if you raise a child with character, and a child that's comfortable, knows themselves, they will become exceptional in their own lives. All right? So, just to plant that seed. Okay. There are a few other things in here, but I think we've pretty much covered it. All right, real quick, the last 7 minutes we have, we're going to go through these messages. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah, they're on the table out there, too. Here, take this one. I don't know which one I can read. Okay, the first one on here is that suffering is a normal part of life. We need to make sure our kids understand that suffering is a normal part of life. In fact, it's a lot of life, right? We don't want to tell them that, maybe too young, but the truth of the matter is that 90% of what we do is hard, and if we get 10% of some joy and some, then we're doing pretty darn good. So suffering is a normal part of life. When you avoid it, when you deny it, when you stuff it, when you run away from it, you're going to shut down your personal development. And we're here to develop from the time we're in utero until the time we die, we're developing. So accepting suffering. Connection with others is the most powerful antidote to suffering. And why do we see our suffering going up in ourselves and in our communities? Because our connection is going down. Social media is not connection. Suicide in boys in the last 10 years has gone up 40%. 30% in girls. Do you think these kids are not suffering? And one of the reasons is because they're not connecting. They're not learning how to connect. I get young adults in my practice now who are tech natives, okay, kids that were growing up with technology from the beginning, and they are coming in saying that technology has ruined their lives. These are 20-year-olds, 21-year-olds, 22-year-olds, and they're saying it's ruined their lives because they say, you know what? We don't know how to do this. We don't know how to have conversation. We don't know how to be uncomfortable with the person next to us. We don't know how to be this way. And they're desperate for it. They're lonely and desperate for true connection. They're so isolated. And they're frustrated because they say, I don't even know how to meet people anymore. Now that I'm out of school, I mean, everybody's online, but, I don't want to do that anymore. And it's so superficial, it's so ridiculous, and there aren't alternatives. So, connection. Most people are faking confidence. Right? Now, what does that mean? What it means is that confidence is not knowing how to do something. That would mean that you have to wait to know how to do something to be confident. Confidence is knowing and believing that you can figure it out. And when you believe that, you're going to have your courage. You're going to step in to adversity. You're going to step into challenge. So we, all of us right now sitting in this room, can be confident right now. You can choose to be confident. A confident person right now. Because all you have to do is believe that you can figure it out, whatever it is. Powerful mindset to have. Okay. You always have a choice. Even when you don't want to make one, you're making one. Even when you choose not to make a choice, you're making a choice. Nobody can ever take that away from you. So Travis Roy, anybody know Travis Roy? He spoke at Con College years ago. is paralyzed from the neck down. He's a hockey player. All he ever wanted to do was play hockey for BU. And he did from the time he was this big. Got to BU, got on the team, they put him on the ice, very first time, is the moment of his life. 30 seconds in, he gets slammed up against the boards and paralyzed, he's done. This is after a childhood of dreaming of nothing else. This guy said something that stuck with me, and we need to teach our kids this. He said, sometimes you pick your challenges, and sometimes they pick you. But it doesn't matter, because you always have a choice. You can always make a choice. Really, really powerful to know that. This is something that my dad taught me very early on, and that is run your own race. We're running this race. We're running this race as parents. Our kids are running this race because we're running this race, and it's not our race. It's based on societal expectations. It's based on irrational thinking. It's based on unrealistic expectations of life. Get back to thinking for yourself. We've got this thing, this social media, that creates this group think. And we actually buy in to believing this stuff we read from our 4,000 friends when they comment on something that's going on in our lives or whatever. And somehow we think they know better than we do. They know us better than we do. Run your own race. Some of your kids are going to go slowly and steadily through life. Some are going to attack because that's who they are. Some are just going to go fast all the time. Let them run their own race. The guy who's going slow isn't necessarily getting behind if that's who they are. They will find their lane. But if they get the message that they're not good enough because the race is to go fast, then they'll go. And that'll come out as depression and anxiety and substance use and abuse. Okay? We'll skip through some of these to finish up. Define a successful life. That's kind of, you guys can read about that. We talked about fixed ability not existing. Expectations we talked about. Learning to use fear, because we are humans, we're animals, we're fear-based. Using fear as a tailwind instead of a headwind. Got to teach our kids. When you feel fear, you can't, if you wait for fear to go away, you'll never do whatever it is you're afraid of, because it's not going to just go away. You have to do it anyway. And there's a great book by Susan Jeffers, Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway. It's awesome, awesome book. It's an oldie but a goodie. I think it was written back in the 1980s. So using fear as a tailwind. Staying flexible in the face of adversity instead of being very rigid. Very important. Whatever you give your energy and time to is going to grow. It's going to get bigger. So when your children are stuck in their external locus of control and they're blaming and they're pushing out and they're doing, and they won't give it up, just draw them a picture and say, you know, this started about this big, and now we're a week into this, and you're still talking about this situation on social media, and now it's this big. You have a choice. What are you going to do about that? Because you're starting to get all worked up, and it's starting to affect how you feel, and your sleep, and your, you know, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. Having courage to learn and to ask questions just for the sake of learning and asking questions. Our kids are learning that learning is about performing. And they're losing that natural curiosity. And the good thing about the internet is you can drill down on a subject and learn. Oh my God. So if you could work with your kids to be curious in a healthy way. Forgiving yourself and others, sometimes very challenging, very important. We're in a very black and white time and very judgmental time in our cultural development. And we're not seeing a lot of forgiveness. And we're flawed, you guys. We're a mess. We're all messed up, all of us, me included. And I would not want to live in a world where people couldn't forgive me for the mistakes that I've made. So forgiveness. And then finally, humor. We're not having enough fun, you guys. We're not having enough fun. We're just taking everything so seriously. And our children aren't learning that fun is really a really important part of life. And there isn't a performance component to fun. Fun is just do it just because it's fun. There's no agenda, there's no expectation, so find time to have fun with your children. Just doing stupid stuff. Mindless, ridiculous, fun stuff. My husband is a master at this. He's a master. Thank God for him. And raising our son was so much fun because he was such a rascal. And they were forever, he and my son, playing tricks on me. And, I'd go ladies' night out, and I never knew when I came home what I was going to get. There was always some trap or something, and they would lie in the hallway and wait for me to come in. And then they'd be like, we got you. So, just fun. Put energy into that to counterbalance all the madness that we're dealing with right now. So thank you guys for coming today. Very much. If there's anything that you want that I might have in terms of information and handouts, I share my intellectual capital just very freely, and you don't have to use my name if you want to reproduce it, if you want to use it for a group you're doing or whatever. I have information on brain development and marijuana, brain development and technology, positive parenting, perfectionism, grit and resilience, all kinds of stuff. So all you need to do is just shoot me an email and tell me what you want, and I'll send it to you. Yeah, great. Yeah, whatever I can do to help you guys that way, please, I'll give you whatever I have. So, anyway, very good. Thank you. What's that? Oh, Old Saybrook, Connecticut. I'm an hour and a half away, unfortunately, but oh yeah. Let everybody know how great it was.